Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We're looking at the dense and honestly fascinating history of Serbia. This is a nation completely defined by where it sits on the map, right smack in the middle of the East and the West. It's literally a place where massive empires have collided, collapsed, and left some pretty permanent marks on both the landscape and the people. Since we're somehow compressing over 2,000 years of history into this breakdown, here is our quick roadmap. We'll start with the crossroads of empires, move into the struggle for independence, look at the Yugoslav experiment, the breakup of Yugoslavia, and finally, modern Serbia in transition.
All right, part one, the crossroads of empires. Let's set the stage in the Central Balkans.
So, about 7.5 million. That is roughly the population of modern-day Serbia today. Geographically, we're talking about this really rugged, mountainous basin carved out by the Sava and Morava rivers. And that geography is everything. The Morava River basically acts as a natural superhighway between the south and the northeast, cutting right through these massive mountain ranges. So for centuries, if an empire wanted to move goods or, armies through the Balkans, they pretty much had to pass right through here. And because they acted as that geographical turnpike for so long, the demographic diversity today is just incredible. While ethnic Serbs make up the majority, there are 22 distinct ethnic groups living there. Plus, you have three major religions completely overlapping: Eastern Orthodox Christianity, Islam, and Roman Catholicism. It's a direct result of all those migrating peoples and conquering empires just constantly moving through and settling in this basin over millennia. Now, a really crucial moment in forming an actual, distinct Serbian identity comes down to this word, autocephalous. Basically, it means having a self-governing head. Back in 1219, under the medieval Nemanjić dynasty, the Serbian Orthodox Church gained this independent status, and by 1346, it was elevated to a full patriarchate. This wasn't just some administrative religious update. It was a massive political consolidation. It really cemented their national identity way, way before any modern borders were ever drawn up. But as you might guess, that early sovereignty didn't last. The expanding Ottoman Empire utilized that exact same strategic Morava Valley we just talked about and invaded in 1453. Just a few years later, in 1459, the capital, Smederevo, fell. What followed was over 3 centuries of Ottoman rule. They heavily taxed the Orthodox Christians and completely upended the social structure. All of the land was transferred to the state and given to local officials called beys. Because of that massive wealth transfer, the traditional Serbian nobility practically vanished overnight. So, preserving Serbian culture, that fell entirely onto the shoulders of the common people and the church. Which brings us to part 2, the struggle for independence. Let's see how that desire for self-rule finally bubbles over. Fast forward to the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire starts weakening internally, and the Serbs seize the moment. What follows is a relentless, multi-decade battle. It kicked off in 1804 with the first major uprising, led by Karađorđe Petrović. It wasn't easy, but through sheer persistence and, some very strategic shifting alliances with powers like France and Russia, they achieved state recognition in 1815. They got autonomy by 1830, and ultimately, at the Berlin Congress in 1878, their complete independence was formally recognized. Moving on to part 3, the Yugoslav experiment. Things are about to speed up drastically. The 20th century in this region was a century of just rapid-fire, dramatic regime changes. We start with the spark that ignited World War I in Sarajevo in 1914. After that war, out of the ashes of collapsed empires, the kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes is formed in 1918. Then comes the devastation of World War II and the 1941 German invasion. Once that dust settled in 1945, the map was redrawn yet again. This time it emerged as the multi-ethnic socialist Yugoslavia led by Tito, a federative system designed to keep all those diverse nations on equal footing. Now for part 4, the breakup of Yugoslavia. We're moving into the highly complex disintegration of the 1990s. Our source material uses a very powerful phrase to describe the swift political and economic changes of 1990 and 1991, calling the transforming federation a cage of hatred, fear, and destruction. The analysis points out that very few people realized at the time just how catastrophic the demands for independence would be. The collapse of the system unfortunately sparked a rising tide of ethno-nationalism, leading directly to fratricidal conflicts and a truly brutal civil war. Now, to understand the 1998 to 1999 Kosovo War, we have to look impartially at the roots of the conflict. And what we find are two sides with incredibly profound, deeply entrenched symbolic attachments to the exact same piece of land. To the Serbians, Kosovo is viewed as the cradle of their nation. It's the site of the pivotal 1389 battle and the literal essence of their Eastern Orthodox faith and identity. To the Albanians, this exact same territory is ancient Dardania, equally a cradle of their nation, representing a continuous historical presence that stretches back centuries. Those two irreconcilable realities tragically collided. Between 1998 and 1999, an intense conflict broke out between Yugoslav forces and the ethnic Albanian Kosovo Liberation Army. It was a period marked by mass expulsions and a severe humanitarian crisis. Ultimately, it led to a NATO bombing campaign in 1999, which forced the withdrawal of Yugoslav troops, placing Kosovo under UN administration. And all of this eventually culminated in Kosovo's 2008 unilateral declaration of independence, a declaration that Serbia, to this day, officially considers illegal under international law. Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, Modern Serbia in Transition. So what does society look like there today? Well, the source analysis paints a picture of a deeply fractured culture, especially when you look at the youth. Every country has a generation gap, right? But here, that divide is sharpened by the intense scars of recent history. On one hand, you have a very liberal, Western-leaning group. They're looking outward to Europe, wanting freedom and believing that adopting Western values is the key to social progress. On the other hand, you have a group described as conservative and traumatized. They are terrified of moral collapse, highly suspicious of modern consumerism, and they still carry the heavy psychological weight of international interventions and past betrayals. And we can't ignore that this social fracture is deeply tied to economic whiplash. Moving from a state socialist system to a market economy has been brutally painful. Before the 90s, heavy industry was everything, over 40% of the GDP. It provided tons of jobs, but honestly, it just wasn't globally competitive. Then in the 2000s, they tried privatization, which basically led to massive deindustrialization, huge unemployment, and evaporating social safety nets. By the late 2000s, the government tried these hasty neoliberal stabilization policies. For example, they introduced a flat tax that people actually liked, but they offset it by hiking up the VAT on everyday food and basic goods, which just hammered the average citizen. So when you're faced with this immense economic precarity, sky-high inflation, and a general feeling that the traditional political system is completely broken, you really have to ask, how does the next generation actually move forward? Well, according to the analysis, they are just pivoting away from the state entirely. For this generation, the internet is everything. It's a vital escape hatch and an essential survival tool. It's where they get their education, it's how they socialize globally, and it's their main antidote to the dreariness of this long transitional period. Because there's so much distrust in traditional politics, the goal for a lot of young people is to just bypass the state completely, building their futures in tech or working for non-governmental organizations instead. As Serbia continues to navigate this incredibly complex transition, it has to balance a rich, multi-layered heritage with the modern demands of global and European integration. And it seems geography really is destiny here. So we'll leave you with this final thought to ponder. As we move deeper into the 21st century, will Serbia's historic position, sitting right at the crossroads of East and West, continue to be its biggest historical hurdle? Or can it finally be leveraged as the nation's greatest asset?